In this video, instead of approaching patriarchy from a theoretical framework or attempting to explain how patriarchy affects our lives, I figured it would be more useful for me as a man to actually take a stroll down memory lane and revisit some of the moments where it became very obvious to me how patriarchy and misogyny and mysogynoir had really tainted the way that we interacted with each other in the world. For those who are just jumping on board here, welcome. For those who have seen some of the previous videos, welcome back. I'm just Mike, and this is Drawing the Line. As a black man in America, I am acutely aware of the impact of racism on my life. And I'm also frustratingly aware of the lengths that more privileged people go to dismiss my lived experience, to downplay it, to refute it, to outright reject the experiences that I have had that demonstrate to me very clearly that I live in an oppressive society, that I am being oppressed on the basis of my race. It is because of this awareness of the lengths that people will go to dismiss my experience that I feel compelled to make sure that I am not doing that to other people. I am a black man in a patriarchal society, and therefore there is a privilege that is inherent to my existence in this society. As I stand here now, more educated, more aware, more empathetic, having learned life lessons, having studied feminism, womanism, having spent some time interrogating my own beliefs, it would be easy for me to use where I am now as a justification for where I have been in the past, for how I have acted in the past. And so I believe that if I'm going to talk about patriarchy, then the best place for me to start is to really take a candid look back at some of my own experiences with patriarchy, being in a patriarchal system, in particular being a man amongst other men or when I was younger boys, and reflect on how some situations played out and how I missed the mark. Around 16 years old, my junior year in high school, and I'm hanging out with some friends. I'm at a friend's house, in his room. I don't think parents were home. Maybe about 5 or 6 of us just kind of spread around the room. One of the common conversations was people talking about their sexual conquests, their experiences with girls or who they were trying to get at. You know, of course, high school teenagers, hormones raging. This was a constant topic among guys. That was normal. When it became abnormal was when a friend pulled out a VHS tape. For those who are younger, look it up, but it was a thing. He pops the tape in, and it's a tape of him and some girl he had just hooked up with. To say the least, it was a very awkward situation for me. I was thankful he didn't play the tape for long, and we very quickly the conversation just kind of moved on past that moment. And really, that's the story. In hindsight, I realized that my awkwardness was misplaced. My unease with the situation was misplaced. At no point did I consider the other person in the video. Now, understanding what I do about consent, at no point then did I consider, did she know he was videotaping her? And even if she did she consent to him showing this videotape to other people? My assumption is that yes, she knew that the videotaping was happening just from the camera angle and stuff, but I don't know that. There's no way for me to prove that. I didn't ask that. But I'm pretty certain that she did not say, hey, you're fine to go show this to whoever you want to. And so it was a violation of her privacy and a violation of this intimate experience that they had. This is one of those experiences that, looking back, where it's kind of like I didn't know what I didn't know, but at the very least, the unease that I felt with the situation, maybe I should have at least expressed that. Maybe that would have stopped people from doing this kind of thing in the future. So we fast forward a little bit, a year or two later, I'm in college, freshman year. And in freshman year, most people live on campus. In fact, a lot of colleges make you live on campus. And your first friends are likely to become people in your dorm. The dorm I was in, thankfully to me, there was a large percentage of people who came from working class families, people who came from inner cities, who were more down to earth, who didn't buy into the kind of pompous, culture that they were asserting and pushing us to accept, coming into the institution. And I'm very grateful for that, because it made me feel more at home in that environment and less like, does nobody see what's wrong with the stuff that they're saying? It was a lot of classist kind of propaganda pushed on us from the moment we arrived on campus. We had the smallest rooms on the campus and probably the biggest furniture on the campus, and that forced us to hang out outside. And so we quickly became known as the project dorm, because we used the stoop like you use the stoop in the hood. Like every day, all times of night, there would be a group of us hanging out on the stoop in front of our dorm. We had the boombox and we would be playing music. And so people would kind of like jeer at us and say, oh, you stay in the project dorm. So one night we're hanging out on the stoop, and some people are like, yo, we want to go smoke. And it just happened that this sister was walking by. I think she had a friend with her, and she was like chatting with one of the brothers, and she decided she was going to come with us. And we went someplace to find a place to go away from campus where we wouldn't be harassed by campus police or whatever. And we went to, somebody knew a vacant house that was like a block or two away. And so we went and hung out on the porch of that vacant house. Not a smart decision. A group of young black men hanging out at an empty building, next to neighbors who knew that building was vacant, so the police could have been called at any moment. But, youth brain not fully developed, we made that decision anyway. So we're hanging out, bunch of guys, maybe like 6 or 7 guys, and this one sister. And we're just like laughing, joking, doing the things you do when you're hanging out and, partaking in the herbs. It was just a fun night. Just a fun college night, freshman year, just enjoying this college experience. It got really late. She was on a nearby campus that was several blocks away. And so we were like, okay, we're going to walk her back to her dorm to make sure she gets there safe, even though we were closer to our campus. So, noble gesture, chivalry isn't dead, all of that good stuff, right? So we walk her back to her dorm. She gets in safe. We turn around to walk back, and, we're just joking and shooting the shit and, having a fun conversation. But all I hear, and it was like this piercing comment that someone made. He said, yo, she lucky I ain't have some duct tape. And if you ever had a high blown, then you understand this experience. But it was like all of a sudden it's like radar, ding, ding, ding. Like I completely sobered up, and I recognized in that moment the gravity of what he was saying, and yet it's still, he said it in a joking tone. We had walked her home. She was safe. And so it was just kind of like, I took it as kind of like a talking shit kind of moment. Around that time, I was kind of looking for my tribe and started attending like community organization meetings. And that's when I got involved in community organizing and doing like social justice work, Millions for Mumia, political prisoners, things like that. And so I really stopped kind of hanging around with that crew. But that moment sticks out as a core memory, and reflecting on it, just like, how sociopathic it was, how violent that kind of statement was. And even though he said it in a joking tone, like how serious something like that is. And I hope that this brother did not go on or had not previously acted on that kind of thinking, but the sentiment went unchecked. Unlike the situation in high school, I knew right away in this instance, you wrong for that. And I didn't call him out on it. Knowing the contradictions, knowing the problems with it, hearing the misogyny in it, the outright overt violence of the statement, I just kind of let it go. still in college, hanging out near the campus library, and there was like the main walkway. We called it the strip, right? And that might give away where I'm talking about to people who were there. Sitting out on the strip, and people just walk by, people talking to each other. That's where you kind of hang out with your friends, you meet new people. So it's a very vibrant area, just college students everywhere. And so we're on the strip, hanging out, joking, laughing with friends in front of the library, and I hear this loud boom, like bang sound, and it sounded like metallic. Looked over, and from what I could figure out, a guy got really mad at a sister, and he had something in his hand that had batteries in it, and it must have been like a C battery, one of those big C or D batteries, and he took it and he hurled it as fast as he could at the sister who was walking away. She turns around, she hears a loud boom, and she's kind of realizing what happened. He threw that battery at the back of her head. And then the situation became clear to me. He started to curse at her, like, "Oh, you ain't shit anyway. You think you fine, but you ain't nothing." And he started like berating her and insulting her. And it became abundantly clear what had just happened. He had tried to holler at her, made an advance towards her. She either did not pay him any attention, or she outright rejected him, and his ego couldn't handle that. And so he found a weapon and hurled that weapon at her. She yelled back at him a little bit, and he kind of yelled back at her, but he never advanced towards her. It was just kind of a shouting match. It kind of dissipated and moved on. Clearly in this situation, like, it had the potential to escalate to further violence, just from the way he was talking and moving, yelling at the top of his lungs at her, and the fact that she was still standing there, like, yelling back at him at that point. At no point did I feel inspired or compelled to get up and walk towards the situation. I was watching it closely. I was attentive, was hopeful that it would just like dissipate. But given how close they were to each other, if that man had jumped up and rushed to attack her, there were other people there. Maybe someone else would have jumped in. But me, just reflecting on my experience, I was across the street. I did not move any closer to the situation. I did not step in. And so in that, like I take accountability for me seeing that it's wrong, knowing that it's wrong, and for me sitting there and just expecting that, okay, if it goes wrong, someone else will step in. And so this is a case of actual violence. This guy threw that battery with violent intent. Every indication is given that if he's willing to do that, then he would be willing to rush towards her, to throw something else at her, to hit her. And even with all of those cues and all of that awareness, nothing inside of me made me get up and go over and say, I'm going to be the one to assert myself in this situation and help out where it can be helped out. And this is not about coming to someone's rescue or saving someone. It is simply about me as a member of a community, seeing a sister, in trouble, seeing a brother who's out of pocket, like talking to her in a way that he has no business talking to her, over a rejection at that. Even if it wasn't, he has no business coming at her like that. I didn't feel compelled in that moment to actually step in, even though theoretically I had the understanding that what he was doing was misogynistic, that what he was doing was violent and abusive towards a woman. Couple years after that, actually after I graduated from college, riding through a city with a couple friends, and we passed by this woman. She was wearing a short skirt. And I'm sitting in the back seat, and the guy I was sitting next to, he looks over at her and he says, "Man, she can't wear that kind of shit around me." And he said it with like such vitriol. He was angry at her for what she was wearing. And this is why you have to see people in different contexts, because you get to see people from different angles. And so me and him, we only saw each other like doing certain activities. And now we were in just like a normal social setting, like going out to eat, I believe, or maybe coming back from an event. And hearing him say that kind of gave me this insight into who he was. What he was insinuating was that because of what she was wearing, he would not be able to control the impulse to violate her. That was the only way that I could take what he was saying. How dare she dress that way to make me have to feel these feelings, these uncontrollable urges. Usually it's the excuse people give after the fact, but this was a premeditated, she's asking for it. I just kind of looked at him in shock, I guess. But I was clear on what he was saying and how wrong it was. He didn't say it to her, so she didn't even know anything was happening. We were inside the car. But I was in a position to actually check the patriarchy, to actually check the misogyny, to call it out, and to hopefully get him to reconsider his behavior, or to at least let him know that that's not going to fly around me. And I didn't do that. Now I realize that these are pretty benign stories compared to some of the stories that men could tell about their experiences observing or participating in misogyny and patriarchy. I was a silent participant. It would be easy and convenient for me to say, I wasn't involved in it, I didn't say it, I didn't do it, but my silence in the situation was the participation. Because in an oppressive society, in an oppressive system, neutral, silent is serving the advancement of oppression. Oppression depends on a silent mass of people. People who will just let it slide. People who will not call it out when they see it. I could easily rest on the fact that I've never been an abuser. I've never made these kind of like violent remarks towards women, or these kind of very spiteful, hateful remarks towards women. And I'm not saying I'm an angel. You know, I've engaged in like the so-called locker room talks and laughed at sexist jokes and things like that. And so I'm not trying to paint myself as like I'm some better than. But in terms of like these overtly violent acts, these violating acts, I have not participated in those personally through my own actions, but I have participated in those situations through my silence, through my knowledge of the situation and knowing that it was wrong, and me not stepping up and saying something about it. And even in cases where I may not have had the language or the understanding to articulate it, you know, and to connect it to patriarchy and sexism and misogyny and mysogynoir, even me feeling that it was wrong what was happening and not just saying like, I'm not okay with that. You don't know what you don't know. But what you do know, you have to hold yourself accountable for. I have to hold myself accountable for. And so in those situations, I was an active participant because I allowed the situation to persist. I allowed it to go on unchecked. And I had the awareness to know something wrong was taking place. Fortunately, I have grown. I have studied. I have interrogated my own contradictions, my own internalized misogyny and sexism, and that's a continuing process that I'm engaged in. I have had experiences where I have stepped up and called out patriarchy where I've seen it, where I have stood up for women and girls in my life. I have had experiences where I've been in a position of power and I've made it a point to make sure that the activities that I was engaged in were offering a safe and affirming environment for women to be involved in. And so in that sense, I can feel like I'm on the right track. You know, I'm kind of hesitant to call myself a womanist or a feminist, even though I do accept and embrace and have spent a little bit of time, not a lot, but a little bit of time studying those ideologies. And I find that my thinking is very consistent with them. And I do my best to listen to women and respect them in my day-to-day living. But I think it's important just for me to kind of like keep this process of interrogation open and like self-reflection open, and maybe, and I guess deep down I kind of feel like branding myself as a feminist or as a womanist may make me feel too comfortable and less inclined to interrogate my actions and to continue this process of decolonizing myself from this patriarchal mentality. I understand that I am privileged within this patriarchal system. Just by birth, just by being a cisgender, like masculine presenting man, there are certain privileges, certain entitlements, certain benefits of a doubt that are going to be offered to me that are not offered to women. I understand that patriarchy is violent. Like all forms of colonial domination, patriarchy is fundamentally a violent process. It harms women and children, and it also harms boys and men, but women and children to a much greater extent. I understand that in this patriarchal system, there are countless people who are dealing with trauma that can abruptly, completely uproot someone's life, can completely shatter someone's life and send their entire life on a different trajectory. That has not been my experience. And I understand the privilege in that. That for me, and I believe that for a lot of men, maybe even most men, patriarchy plays out as this slow burning trauma. We are indeed limited by it. We are indeed stifled by it. Our emotional intelligence is stunted by patriarchy. Our inability to empathize with other people. Half of the world is women and girls. We have this inability to empathize with them because our privilege conflicts with their personhood. And so I recognize that contradiction, and I'm engaged in the work of making sure that I am anti-patriarchy, anti-misogyny, anti-mysogynoir, and doing what I can within my sphere of influence, my sphere of impact, to make sure that I am fighting the good fight, that I am fighting against the oppression of women. We often will publicly talk about our views about patriarchy and misogyny, but find it very awkward and difficult to confront it when we see it playing out in our daily lives, giving our boy the benefit of a doubt for the thing that he's saying, or giving him a pass even though we know it's wrong, or an awkward smile or a little chuckle or just silence, when that is the front that we are best positioned to fight on. Women don't need us to save them. Women need us to stop attacking them. Women need us to stop being misogynistic to them, to stop thinking less of them, dehumanizing them. And one of the places that we can best facilitate dismantling patriarchy is when we are in groups of men, when we are amongst our boys, when we check them on their shit and don't let the little joke get away, when we don't allow the social awkwardness of the moment to overrule our empathy for the people who are being harmed in that moment. If you've enjoyed this video, I would ask you to like, subscribe, share. I'm going to continue to share my views on topics that I feel are essential for us to talk about in our struggle for self-determination. And I feel that as a black man, it is important for me early on in this series to start engaging with the topic of patriarchy and male privilege and misogyny and misogynoir. And this is the first of, I'm sure, what will be multiple videos where I'll kind of dig into this topic or make reference to ideas about being anti-misogynistic and anti-patriarchy. But this is where I wanted to start it, holding myself accountable for my past transgressions and just reflecting on some of the experiences that I've had with being a silent participant in patriarchy. So thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time. I'm just Mike, and this is Drawing the Line.